What's happening, peeps? Well, I've had the good fortune to be playing Until Dawn for the last week leading up until launch. And as you guys know, I have a penchant for the horror games. So I thought I'd give you my thoughts on the game, whether I think it's good, whether I think it's scary, and if you're a horror fan, whether it's worth picking up. Until Dawn has been developed by Supermassive Games, whose previous titles include things like A Little Big Planet for the Vita, a Doctor Who game called The Eternity Clock, and a bunch of games that focus on augmented reality that use the PlayStation Move. So Until Dawn is a pretty big departure for these guys from the type of experiences that they've been comfortably developing over the last few years. Until Dawn is a survival horror game which can be best described as a 70s or 80s slasher flick. It also borrows some ideas from more modern movies such as the Saw films. You control 8 different characters through a variety of situations. These characters are your typical horror movie stereotypes, so you've got the jock, the princess, the nerdy guy, the nerdy girl, the token black guy, and so on and so forth. The plot sees you trapped in a secluded and spooky mountain getaway during a snowstorm. On top of this, you're not alone. Someone or something is systematically hunting you down and trying to kill you. The goal is to get all 8 characters to the end of the game with as little human casualty as possible. I think if you don't have an appreciation for slasher flicks or horror movies in general, then the story and the characters is probably going to get lost on you. But if you do, I think you'll feel right at home. And despite the source material being well trodden, it still feels new enough in this setting. The gameplay is very much like an interactive movie. Dialogue and character interaction for the most part is pretty good. The dialogue is cheesy, the characters are superficial, and the story is full of cliches as you would expect from this kind of horror flick, but somehow this allows everything to feel more authentic. It's not terribly original, but this is clearly not the area Supermassive Games were trying to break new ground in. What they have focused on is the butterfly effect system, or what they call the dynamic adaptive story. The idea is that the core gameplay is based on decision making. The choices you make can alter the story and character relationships significantly, making each playthrough unique and providing many different possible endings. For the most part, they've done a really good job at hiding all the major forks in the road, and most of the time you'll be unaware of this system until it notifies you of a pivotal moment where something has changed. Even something that you think was small can have large implications later on in the game. Gameplay as a result feels less scripted and more organic, and the story feels less linear because of this. Because there are no lives and no way to replay sections, your actions have real consequences for better or worse. My only complaint is that some of the more important decisions aren't often obvious. It can feel more like luck rather than making a well-calculated decision when you get something right. You can actually view past events and how they influence things as well, which can occasionally provide insight into the kind of behaviour that is likely to be more beneficial in the future. So it's well worth paying attention to the types of decisions that pay off and the ones that don't. Like I said, you don't have lives either, so once a character bites the dust, that's it for them. Apparently it is possible to get through the entire game without any characters dying, but if you're like me, they'll be dying left, right and centre. The story and characters may be reasonably unoriginal, but the gameplay is quite unique. It plays a little bit like a traditional survival horror game, but without the fetch quests and painful inventory management. The focus is on the choices you make and exploration. There are often valuable clues worth searching for, and it pays to be thorough. This is particularly true with the totem premonitions. These will give you valuable insight into future events which may or may not happen. In terms of controls, they're deliberately heavy and slow, as you would expect from a traditional survival horror game. You can use motion controls as well, although I didn't because, well, it's motion controls. The traditional controls are not as bad as old school Resident Evil tank style controls, but I think they're deliberately stiff to heighten the sense of tension. This doesn't hold the game back as there isn't really any platforming or sections heavily reliant on movement and reflex speed. The sections that are handled by QuickTime events, and there are more than a few of these. Normally I don't care for QuickTime events at all. They break the immersion and cheapen scenarios which would be much more fun if you had full control. But in Until Dawn, these sections mix up the pace, and unlike most games, they can't be replayed, so failing will often have irreversible consequences. As a result, they seem more of a natural fit and less annoying. I also understand that they often allow a more cinematic approach to gameplay and scene setting, which is what this game is really trying to be, an interactive movie. Ultimately, I think the game would have been better without them, but having said that, I didn't get frustrated by any of the QuickTime sequences that I played. Visually, Until Dawn is a pretty impressive looking game. It runs on the same engine that Killzone's Shadowfall does, and there's lots of excellent use of lighting and particle effects used to establish the mood. Character animation is also decent, particularly the facial animations. Characters will have the appropriate terrified looks on their faces, and dialogue is also animated outside of cutscenes, which helps tie it all together. The fluidity of the movement helps the controls feel less clunky too, and there's hardly any awkwardness as you move your character around. Music is excellent as well. It really helps set the tone and keeps you on the edge of your seat ready for the next jump scare. From what I understand, the music system is actually a really complex system of layering, and there's an article to the way that they recorded this which I'll put in the description if you want to read about it. It's really interesting. Camera angles are often tight and restricted for dramatic effect, and the game does an excellent job of framing scenes in a menacing way. You're generally only provided with the minimal amount of information that you need, and it can be easy to overlook clues hidden in dark corners.
It's like a little adventure, a sexcapade.
So I guess the question that you're wondering is it scary? It's pretty heavy-handed with the jump scares, but I think it does do a good job at setting you up for them. There's plenty of dark, scary environments like basements, caves, and moonlit woods. And as I mentioned just earlier, the camera angle makes sure that you're never certain of what might be lurking around the corner. Ultimately, yes, it is quite scary, and I'll admit there are even certain sections where I had to turn down the volume on my headset when things got a little intense. It's not the type of cerebral scary that PT is, like it's not going to keep you up late at night, but in terms of emulating the source material and working as a horror movie, it hits the nail on the head. In my playthrough, I didn't really encounter any issues, any bugs. Loading was almost non-existent. There was only a few brief moments in which I saw a loading screen. It is pretty light on setup options though. The lack of screen setup meant that some parts of the screen, including messages, were cropped on my TV. There's also no control options other than traditional and motion. This might be deliberate though to reinforce the feeling of discomfort, but a button config would have been nice. Likewise, there's no audio options either other than the balance between music effects and dialogue. A headset option or a mix between stereo and surround would have also been welcome. This game definitely won't be for everybody, but I think fans of the horror genre will get a lot out of it. While the story and characters don't really push any boundaries, the butterfly concept keeps things interesting and makes the experience feel more personal. It also allows for multiple playthroughs with lots of different possible outcomes. The scares can be a little bit cheap, but the game does do a good job at establishing a creepy mood, and to its credit, I was still jumping in the later stages of the game. Overall, I really enjoyed my playthrough of Until Dawn. Is it a classic? No, but it's still pretty enjoyable, and if you're a horror fan, I definitely think it's worth a spin. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.